Yes.
What's the mechanism of deportation? I mean, I've heard of people in the past actually just almost literally being hauled right to the airport and just put on a plane. Is that still what happens? I mean, do you put in detention for a while? How do they, there's no legal recourse, right? I mean,
No.
and how is it, they just snatch you and just send you to the airport?
That's the thing, there isn't a process. So there is different kinds of things that can happen in processes, but there isn't like one, right? So then there's some people that just get picked up by your local police officer. They go and they put them in jail, and then the police department calls ICE and says, I have a person here that I think that doesn't have a driver's license and they're probably undocumented. ICE comes, and then there's instances when ICE puts you into a detention center, and you could stay there for years because they're making money off of you. Or there's times where ICE comes, and then they find a way to transport you to the border and deport you. Then there's instances where some people have been stopped by a police officer, and the police officer lets them go, but they notify ICE. And because they think, right, this person has something going on here, then ICE looks for you at your house. And then if ICE finds you, sometimes ICE gives you this deportation order, but you go to court to maybe fight it, or you go to court to, right? And then there's sometimes where you could go to court and that day they'll pick you up and take you, and then there's times where they'll let you go home. There's not like a straight, right, line of how this happens. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so scary to us, because you don't know when it's gonna happen to you. But for example, back in the day, there was a massive raids happening, and they would, like I said, close off like a block, and every car that would drive by, they would check, or they go to their jobs. But then there's also, if there's someone in the household that has a deportation order, ICE can come to the house and look for them. But a lot of times what would happen is if you open the door, they would take the whole family, or whoever was there that didn't have a deportation order but was undocumented. So there's like a million ways that this could happen, and you never know which one's gonna happen to you. So I don't know if you guys heard, but there was recently a warrant sweep raid in Ridgefield 2 weeks ago.
Say that again. What?
Warrant sweep.
Okay.
So the Hennepin County partnered up with ICE, and for that day, ICE agents rode in the car with the police officers. Sheriffs, sorry. And did warrant sweeps. So they went looking after people that had warrants. Now, this warrant could be for a million things. It could be you just have a deportation order. That just happened 2 weeks ago. So they're already starting their engines. So there isn't a way we can know, hey, ICE is going to start doing this, go into this town, because there's a lot of undocumented people there. No.
How are we going to know about deportations? How are they going to know about deportations, and how are we going to?
So the way we don't know, no one knows this answer to this question. No one in the nation. What I can tell you is that the way I imagine it in my head is like these like raids that happen, these like isolated raids that happen throughout the years it's going to be like a big picture of that. So if there is like growing up in Illinois, this happened a lot. And when they would close off a street and they started a raid in the street, the Latino radio stations would broadcast it. Someone would call in and they'd be like, hey, there's a raid happening. And they would broadcast and they'd be like, don't go on this street and this street. By then, a lot of people got caught. A lot of people were picked up, you know? But then there was a lot of people that maybe were able to avoid that. You know, that happened to us a lot of times. Jobs too. I mean, if it happens in a job, you're not gonna know. You're gonna go to your job that day and the raid's gonna happen and you're not gonna know. I mean, they've done raids outside of schools when parents are picking up their children from elementary school. So the thing is, we don't know. What we do know is that there's a lot of immigrants that have deportation orders that are maybe like, I know they're gonna come after me, and I need right, refuge. And a lot of times that's backed up by legal advice. So maybe they already have a lawyer that's trying to fight their deportation order, and the lawyer's like, it's time to go into sanctuary. And sometimes maybe that's not going to be true.
How many people is it possible for sanctuary churches in the state of Minnesota to provide refuge to?
Like, how many people can a church take?
Right, and how many, does Isaiah have some idea in mind for how many people of the 90,000 undocumented people in Minnesota might actually be able to be put into sanctuary?
As many as you can take. So there isn't a certain number. I think as congregations, maybe if you already have, a family or two or maybe more, and you're like, hey, like we can't, there's nowhere for them to stay anymore, they need to go somewhere else and stuff like that. And maybe we're preparing for the worst case scenario. Maybe the worst case scenario doesn't happen. And maybe there's certainly certain number of churches that will have a family. That's another thing we don't know. So we actually don't know how bad it's gonna get. We have ideas, but when these rates were happening in the early 2000s, anyone that was working on immigration were running around like chickens with their heads cut off. That's how it was. It was like, this happened right here, this happened over here, what happened, can we get people, can we not? And there was a lot of people that got deported, and there was nothing we could do. Yeah, so that is a big thing, a big issue, right? That they will cut the funding, federal funding from cities that declare themselves sanctuary cities. Now, we also need to understand that when a city declares themselves sanctuary city, it's not like ICE can't go into the city. They can't. They can go into their deportation orders. What they're saying is that they're not gonna work with them, right? And the same thing with police departments. Like maybe the police department is saying, I'm not gonna work with them, but it doesn't mean ICE can't come. So a lot of us are thinking like, if there's a city, can we talk with that city? What are certain regulations they can put in place, right? Protections that are more than that. Can that happen? Maybe. That's a question that's happening all around the country right now. How much more protection can cities provide, or how much more protection can campuses provide? But it's more of a statement, right? Like, we are not okay with what you're doing, we're not okay with all of this. But the reality is, a lot of people are gonna be upset about this federal funding. So another question that we are looking into is, how much is that federal funding? Because there's some cities that it's actually not a lot, it's like maybe little. And then there's cities that maybe get more, we don't know. So part of it is, if there is a sanctuary city, finding out how much federal funding they actually get, because maybe it's not even a significant amount. The question was, once a person goes into sanctuary, what future do they have? And that is a really good question, because sanctuary, this is why I feel like sanctuary congregations are so important, because like I said, cities and campuses and police departments can only offer so much. But in a church, when someone declares themselves sanctuary, it's actually their last option. It's like the end of the road kind of thing. And they can't go out of the church. They can't step outside of it, so they can't go to work. And if a family comes in, the kids can't go to school. It's making that person's life public. So saying, yeah, this person is, declaring sanctuary in this church, and this is why, and this is who this person is, and humanizing that person. Because what happens right away is that when people know that someone is undocumented, their humanity is taken away. So there's a million things that could happen to someone that's undocumented because they're not seen as a human being anymore. And part of declaring them sanctuary, and why it's so crucial for this to happen in a congregation, is because you're saying, no, this person is a child of God. And they're not alone, and this is why. So a lot of times you make it public, you do press conferences, you try to get legal advice. Maybe there is a pathway for this person to get some sort of protection. And maybe not. Maybe this person just doesn't have anywhere to go back to. And they need to see if the laws, change.
An idea of the approximate number of undocumented people in Minnesota?
Yes, last time it was 95,000. Yes, I've heard it, maybe it has grown a little bit. And that's where I go back to, we won't be able to be there for everyone. And that sounds so horrible, but we haven't been there for everyone. And part of the reason why, right now, you know how, like, you guys are like, but then why don't we do this, or why, you know? It's not that people haven't thought about it, but the system is so good at doing what they're doing that it's so difficult. Yes, and you know, that's part of the reason why we're doing these teach-ins, because the immigration community has been fighting this in a silo for many years. And part of it is because of fear, right? And we don't know who we can trust. We don't know if this person seems like a good person and then they're gonna call ICE on us, because that has happened. So part of it is like, how do we get out of that fear and start showing people how actually the system is working, right? And it works perfectly well to benefit off of, you know, everything we do.
I think the sanctuary thing is perfect, and I know that other churches will do that. But it seems to miss the point, though, that there's a substantial number of the 90,000 undocumented folks in Minnesota that actually have jobs, as you have declared. So what have we considered how we can go to Walmart or Target or Chipotle or whatever as an economic base and say, you have to stand up for these people because you are hiring them and taking advantage of them, and maybe stop buying things at Target until Target helps deal with the issue.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really good question. A lot of people haven't really asked or have resolved the question about what can these jobs do for them, right? But there's a lot of jobs that maybe would do that, and then there's a lot of jobs that the reason they have them there is because they're benefiting off of them.
Right.
They're not friendly about
That's my
it.
point.
The question is like, who maybe, you know, really putting out, who are these jobs, who are these employers that do support it, and who are these employers that don't? But then at the same time, then there's a big question of, if you put out there, these employers, blah, 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 you're putting out there all of the undocumented workers that are working there. So there's like pros and cons to that, and I think that's a really good question of finding a way to organize, right, around that, because we don't have the answer to that yet. I don't think anyone does, because we don't know how much employers are going to be, they'll want to, you know, protect people, or they'll want to speak up pro people around this issue. I mean, a lot of people have told me that, they're like, why don't you just go to Canada? I'm not really sure why go or not go. There's a lot of people that consider this home. You know, like they've lived here for 2 decades. They have nowhere else to go. But even if they did go to Canada, the reason why, I don't know if you guys heard this, but Canada removed the visa requirement for Mexicans. So now if you're Mexican, you don't need a visa to go to Canada. This isn't because they're being nice. This is because they also profit off of cheap labor. So there's like a million things right there.